For decades, Bill Cosby was known as America's dad for his role as Cliff Huxtable in The Cosby Show. Then came a flood of credible sexual assault allegations from dozens of women, many of whom told a similar story of being drugged and then raped by the actor. Most of the statutes of limitations had passed for as many survivors to press criminal charges, but the statute hadn't passed for one accuser in Philadelphia, Andrea Constant. And using an unsealed deposition Cosby gave in a civil suit Constant had brought against him years earlier, prosecutors brought charges against him days before the time ran out. That case went to trial, and in 2018, Cosby was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault and sentenced up to 10 years in prison. But Cosby vowed he would never admit guilt and kept pursuing legal avenues to overturn those convictions. And today, as I'm sure you know, Pennsylvania's highest court did just that. Only a couple of years into his sentence, and Cosby was released from prison. The court focused on a former prosecutor, later to gain national attention leading Trump's second impeachment defense, promising not to bring criminal charges to encourage Cosby to give the deposition incriminating himself that was later used in that 2018 trial. And the justices decided future prosecutors had to honor that deal. Here's what an attorney for some of Cosby's accusers had to say in response.
I'm glad he got some time served. I really am. But if you think, I believe it's more than 60 or 70 women in total have accused him. He got to have a good long life of wealth and privilege before he was held accountable for his crimes. So it was only a very tiny, tiny measure of the justice that he should have received.
Joining me to discuss are former actress and model Helen Gumpel, who has accused Cosby of making unwanted sexual advances, lewd gestures towards her, including standing in front of her with his crotch in her face while she's on the set of The Cosby Show in 1987, and former U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, Carmen Ortiz, now with Anderson and Krieger, LLC. Carmen and Helen, good to see you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Thank you very much.
Carmen, can I start with you? I followed the testimony in this trial pretty closely and came away convinced he was not just a sexual predator, but a serial sexual predator. But Bruce Castor, the former prosecutor who went on to defend Trump, as I say, did cut a deal with him, saying he wouldn't prosecute. And Cosby did rely on that deal to give testimony in the civil trial that I said was self-incriminating. So did the Supreme Court not make the right decision in Pennsylvania? Supreme Court, as painful as that may be?
Well, I think procedurally, they did make the right decision in terms of that prosecutor should be held to his word, his agreement. It's a fairness issue. It's a due process issue. And he agreed that he would not be prosecuted if he cooperated and participated in that civil trial. Now, it was because of that civil case that he provided the testimony that then eventually led to his conviction in the criminal case.
You know, I heard from a lot of people today saying how outrageous it was that Bruce Castor, this former prosecutor, made this deal to begin with. But his contention was he didn't have the evidence in 2005 to prosecute, and that's why he, quote, encouraged Cosby to testify by giving him immunity. Can you imagine yourself under similar circumstances having made the same kind of deal, as distasteful as it may have felt?
You know, unfortunately, when you have nothing, you try to look for something. I know that people criticize the deals that we made in the Whitey Bulger case, if you recall, Jim. They're distasteful, they're horrible, but what do you get at the end of the day? And many of these cases were very difficult to make. Now, that said, what's surprising here is that the court, I think, has removed the ability to retry this case and has basically put an end to it rather than suppressing the evidence that they say was a result of unfairness and undue process.
I want to get back to that in a second, but Helen, I want to turn to you. What was your reaction when you heard this afternoon? This is just days after Cosby was denied parole because he refused to show remorse, to show any sense of guilt, to sign up for any programs to help sexual offenders. What was your reaction?
I was very disappointed. I wasn't angry, but very disappointed. But then I thought to myself, this is one of the most powerful men in the nation, in the world. And a bunch of women got together and got And we didn't even ask for anything. We just wanted some kind of justice. And we got 2 years. And he's no longer known as America's dad.
That's a good point.
That's pretty good.
But by the way, speaking of those women, I'm sure virtually everybody remembers the incredible cover of New York Magazine with a whole dozens of women who did have the courage to stand up, as you said, to one of those most powerful people in this country. Well, Helen, I'm glad to hear you say what you just said, but do you not worry about the potential negative effect this has on future survivors, saying at the end of the day, they get off?
Well, it's a statute of limitations, and we all knew that before, and we stood up anyway. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that we were the first.
Yes.
We broke ground, and that's what it is when you break ground. You don't get as much as you want, but you started off, and it was like an avalanche. Look at it now. Everything's changed.
You know,
and we should be very proud of that.
You should, all of you should be very proud of that, and I really am glad to hear you say it. Carmen, back to you for a second. Why didn't the court do exactly what you're suggesting, saying that is the poisoned fruit, so to speak, of his testimony that he gave only because of the deal? Don't allow that to be admitted, and allow prosecutors, current prosecutors, to decide if there's enough evidence in this individual case to proceed again. I don't get that at all.
You know, I don't understand it either, Jim, and I haven't read the full decision, so I don't know if they explain why they decided on that particular thing. But keep this, and to Helen's remark, and my heart goes out really to all the victims in this case that are dealing with limited justice. But at the end of the day, this ruling did nothing to negate his culpability, to expose him for the predator that he was and still is. And so there is some solace in that. It could be, going back, is that the court may want to send also a message to prosecutors that when you make a certain commitment, when you take a certain position, you just can't go back on your word, rely on evidence that you said you would never rely on, that someone then acted, to their detriment, and then was convicted as a result of that. It doesn't matter that the defendant in this particular case is deplorable. That's not what the law doesn't change or isn't applied differently based on the nature of the particular defendant. But I do think that, the court felt strongly that this had been unfairly utilized because, but for that deposition testimony, when she admits that he had drugged women in order, and in particular, I believe it was Andrea Constant who was the victim in that particular case, that he wouldn't have been able to take advantage of them and decently assault them and so forth.
I want to underline something you just... I'm sorry. I want to underline something you just said, Carmen, that I feel remiss that I didn't say. Despite the outcome of this case, the decision of this divided court, there is nothing, in their opinion, nothing that in any way undercuts any of the allegations made against Cosby by Constant or any of the other totally credible accusers, which is a really important point. Helen, when we spoke several years ago, you answered this, but I think it's important for people to hear it again. What caused you to decide to have the strength to stand up against, again, to use your words, one of the most powerful and formerly popular people in this country?
Well, it had to do with my husband. We were protesting in front of Fordham University against clergy sexual abuse, because my husband was sexually abused by Father Roy Drake when he was 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And I heard on the news that the Cosby victims have come out. There were only 10 of them, and they were being made fun of. And in my experience, I knew Bill Cosby. I knew what he was capable of, but I was successful. I had a career, and I wasn't intimidated into, I suppose, date rape or whatever, it's called. So I said, I have to stand up with them. I know it's just to say that I'm with you. It's the truth. And together we can do something. I know it's not perfect, but the world's not perfect. But we did something and we did it together. And we did get some kind of justice. And it set a precedent for other women.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And Carmen, before you have the final word, I think it matters a lot to a man like Cosby. The first line in his obituary, whenever that happens, of course, will be about what you talked about the predatory behavior of this man. Carmen, you have the final 30 seconds.
Yeah, I want to say that not only was he exposed, and in some sense there's a degree of justice in that, but to Helen's point beforehand, by taking the courageous actions that they did, they have empowered other women. You know, I've been asked, do you think that this reversal is going to impact the Me Too movement or women's ability to come and have their voices heard? I don't think so. I think there'll be less of the excuses like statute of limitations, missing witnesses. I think people will speak out, women in particular, when these incidents happen, and not be afraid, because they are being heard, they are being believed, and there is power in numbers, and there's strength in numbers. And so, Helen, kudos to you and everyone else who advocated, who spoke up in this case. But I do think that that will empower our future, women of today.
I want to echo Carmen's words about you, Helen, and thank you for coming back again. Best to you, Carmen. It's good to see you as well. Thank you both.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.